It is a poverty of the English language in that we use the word depressed to describe how a person feels when BYU loses a football game, and to describe how a person feels 10 seconds before he commits suicide. We often confuse depression with sadness. However, depression is not simply having a bad hair day or even finding out that Michael Scott is going to be leaving the office. Because depression is a neurological disorder of the brain that impairs a person's ability to function. I'm embarrassed to admit that before I learned this, I used to wonder if a person with depression was maybe just a little bit weak, lazy, or selfish. That is because there is a serious stigma in our society about mental illnesses and depression. I would like to talk about 3 major myths that I believe contribute to this negative stigma. The first is that people with depression need to try harder. It has been proven that people with depression have a dramatic reduction of brain activity during their depressed episodes. There is a malfunction in the neurotransmitters that allow for the natural flow of serotonin and dopamine in the person's brain. Quite simply, depression is a chemical imbalance that usually cannot be fixed by willpower alone. The second myth is that the opposite of depression is simply happiness. I believe that it is this myth that occasionally causes us to downplay the severity of depression. You may argue, isn't it natural to feel depression and sadness at certain points in our life? And I would respond that the range of human emotions is an extremely valuable asset that each of us has been given. But emotion is adaptive and depression is maladaptive. Depression is a constant feeling of deep and profound despair that impairs a person's ability to function. I submit that the opposite of depression is not simply happiness, it is vitality. The third myth is that depression is a form of weakness. Religious leader Jeffrey R. Holland recently opened up about his own struggle with depression. He said, "Mental illnesses are some of the realities of this mortal life, and there should be no more shame in acknowledging them than in acknowledging a battle with high blood pressure or the sudden appearance of a malignant tumor." Now, these facts convinced me of the realities of depression. However, I would like to share with you a powerful experience I had that helped me move from being completely ignorant toward the realities of depression to full of sympathy for these courageous sufferers. I had the opportunity to volunteer at the Utah State Hospital for Mental Health. It was here that I met a man who I will call Tommy. Tommy is about 25 years old and he is wearing a Chicago Bulls hat without fail every time I see him. My first interaction with Tommy, I asked him if he had the opportunity to see any of the NBA games during the previous week. He slowly shook his head no. This turned into a weekly routine of me reading Tommy some of the stats and highlights from the games of the previous week. Tommy is so depressed that he can't even look me in the eyes. And I began to become a little bit disheartened that after several weeks, Tommy had never said a single word to me. However, one night, after finishing reading Tommy some of the stats, he looked up and he had tears in his eyes. He simply said, "Thank you." Such a simple gesture, yet it pierced me to the core, because in that moment, I was able to sense so much the torment going on inside this other human being. Tommy craved human connection, but his depression had figuratively decapitated him to the point that he was incapable of communicating. Tommy longed for someone to understand him, but his illness had robbed him of the ability to physically speak. Tommy was desperate to be healed. Now, in this moment, a lesson rang loud and clear to me, which is the message I want to share with you today. Depression is not a choice. It is a disease. We will never be able to break down the stigmas in society if we wait for society to do it for us. Change starts with individuals. It starts with each of you. So I ask you to stand up for those with mental illnesses. Rather than believing the myths, let us believe the truth. That first, people with depression do not need to try harder. They need us to try harder to understand what they are going through. Second, the opposite of depression is not simply happiness, it is vitality, and every person deserves the right to feel alive. And third, depression is not a form of weakness. It is an unfortunate reality that a courageous few must face in this life. Depression is not a choice, it is a disease.